So, hello everybody. As you noticed, I'm from Romania, as I said earlier, and although it's a rather technical conference, I'm a business analyst, and I like to think that I was supporting, in my experience, some fellow DevOps engineers in in implementing continuous delivery in a project and in a product actually. So what I'm going to talk today, it's about business analysis activities I performed in this environment, in a continuous delivery environment. And are there any BAs in the room? Oh well, you will confirm or inform my affirmations, and you'll see if you found yourself in the same position as I was. So let's start with some nice drawing, which should remind you of something. Does it? It's a rather old cycle of continuous delivery, right? Okay. It's old, but it also contains some business analysis activities. Actually, that's my perspective for this drawing, and I'll get into that by giving you some examples per each phase, which business analysis activities can be performed according, or rather following, the directions of a business analysis body of knowledge. Okay, so let's start with develop and build. In these phases, actually the business analyst can do some work on the processes for delivering the project, can do some work on refining or identifying requirements depending on the environment of the project. And when I say processes, I'm not referring necessarily to the processes on client side, but rather to the things that the team is doing and how the team plan to deliver some stories and a product in the end. The next phase, the build phase, is actually meant for the code to reach an upper environment, or the first environment for testing in the continuous delivery lifecycle. But for business analysts, build means starting delivering to the team some specification document based on some scenarios identified in the requirements process, in the refining requirements process. Does this make sense from your perspective? Because in the end, business analyst is a support role. That's my perspective. And if you think of business analyst as a part of the team, although in the presentations from this conference, at least in the keynote, there was no business analyst anywhere. So we're trying to make a room by helping the team to get focused on the real and important things for the client. And that leads us to the next steps, the test and deploy. In the continuous delivery, test mean running automated tests to validate the code for the first environment, and then to qualify it for the next. And that's something that a business analyst can do by adding value to its deliverables, the stories or the user stories, writing down given when then acceptance criteria, and elaborating the use cases identified, derived from the scenarios from previous phases. Actually, the use cases are very important for each project, and the project I worked on was rather a back-end one, and in that case there weren't quite use cases, but rather usage of the systems by all the other systems that were upstream and downstream. In the deploy phase, the business analyst, I did something, I created some test data in some previous projects, and finally, deploy for a business analyst means the first deliverable, tangible and important for the team and for the client, and the one that brings, let's say, everybody together in the same direction and share, let's say, eases the sharing of the common understanding and common language, and that's about user stories. Although in the diagram there were 5 phases, actually for a business analyst there is an intermediate phase after releasing. It's the feedback, which needs to come from different sources. That's the team, the client, the end user. Because feedback gathered from all the sources helps the loop start again and facilitates rather the quality of the business analyst deliverables, and in the end the quality of the product. And also understanding the feedback from the end customer gets you to the point of bringing more value to the end customer, and thus more money for the client that builds the product. Of course, it's important to mention that this project was delivered in an outsourcing company, and I think some of you work in the same area. Services company which provide software products to the client, and that's an important, let's say, context outlining for this. So in the release phase, a business analyst writes down the final acceptance criteria to the user stories, gets the acceptance of the client, and also writes the acceptance criteria by collaborating to the team, which brings us to some of the things the previous speakers also mentioned, at least in this room and in the keynote. Collaboration is very important for the release phase of the business analyst's work. And also the feedback, as I mentioned, it's important to have feedback from all 3 parties: the team, the customer, and the end user of the product. Without further ado, I will just skip some steps and move to a short Q&A session, and after that I will let's say reinforce and show you a summary of the presentation, just to have it really focused on to get your focus on it. So this Q&A session is important for me because I want to hear what your opinions in regards with this view of continuous delivery cycle. So, any questions? Any experience you want to share? Actually, did this approach made sense? Yeah?
We'll go to later to Slido questions.
Yep, please.
How do you see a business analyst different from product manager?
So the question for everybody else: how do I see the business analyst compared to the product manager? As I mentioned earlier, I worked in a services company, a software services company. So this means that we provide software services to a client. usually to get to the point where you're a product manager, you actually sit in client's courtyard. And I'm not sure that any of you met some clients that are willing to give this position to an outsource, to a third-party vendor. But in case of an internal product, the business analyst can play can be the product manager. But this must be a bit, let's say, it has to be a balance between the business analyst activity, which consists in staying with the team, discussing with the details in depth with everybody, and the product manager, which has some other activities that are not related directly to interaction with the team. So it's let's say business analyst can be a bridge between the product manager. In case of a small product, the product manager can do the business analysis activities, or even members of the team, because I went to some other projects, some other clients that the teams were really into T-shaped DevOps engineers, T-shaped software engineers actually, which wrote tests, developed stories, and so on. Does that answer okay? Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned the feedback from, let's say, customers or end users going back to development team. We're quite often facing like challenge issue with the development team, because they do have like defect backlog or features backlog, and when someone like business analyst comes with their feedback, they say, hold on for future releases. Like in a year or two, we might do that. We have lots of important stuff to do at the moment.
Yes, I totally agree with that, because the when a backlog exists and an MVP is defined and the product roadmap is already done, it's usually hard to introduce new features. But the feedback is important in any step, even intermediate steps through a major release, because it might switch the roadmap completely. When you talk about Scrum, in Scrum it's easier to do that if it's made well. In planned iterative, it's harder, but it can be done. But in Kanban is the Kanban is the, let's say, the playground for this kind of changes, and usually the feedback must be incorporated in creating the scope for the next even minor release, from my perspective. And I didn't have a problem adding something to the backlog and convincing both the team and the product owner or the product manager from the client that we need to do this in order to deliver more value. It's very important how you position yourself as a business analyst in front of this change, because the product is already defined, but we might have, from the feedback, get some features that are important for the end users, and if they are important to the end users, in the end they bring more money to the client. So in that direction it's easier. But when you talk to the team, it's a different perspective, because taking out something that is big and is not useful for the clients and introducing something that is relatively the same size but brings more value, it's about convincing the team that things are going to work out fine. Does this answer your question?
Yes, partially.
Okay.
Usually dev team says that we know better what customer needs, and those stupid. Customers just complain about the things which do not work. It will work great in next 2 releases.
Oh yeah, that's something that from the technical perspective is true. From the and a business as a business analyst, working in a backend project is it's a very frequent discussion that you mentioned. But when working on the front end, you can get help from the client and from the designers even. Although the technical team, the dev team says that technically it's easier like this, and we will deliver quickly, and we don't need this feature because we know better. Usually when you put some hard data in front of an engineer, he will believe you. And it's exactly as I said, it's a switch of perspective. From the client perspective, in order to convince him that this feature brings more value, it goes drill down to the money. From the to the dev team, it's a switch, meaning that it brings more value for the end customer, which is the most important. And that's something that you build step by step in a team. When starting a project, the end customer should be the main focus. And everybody in a development team understands or heard of the concept, either customer first or customer experience or whatever you want to call it. But some of them are familiar. And if you bring hard facts that there's a similar application or a similar feature in the market that has a lot of users, the statistics usually convince an engineer, although it might be harder from the implementation perspective. Is the answer complete? Okay, thank you. Any other question?
I wanted to ask about the communication between the tester and the BA. So, like you mentioned that the BA should provide the test data and also some user stories. So, what do you think in that case? Because in our practice, usually the tester is the one who is responsible for all the corner scenarios and user stories and also the test data.
It's all about collaboration. Thank you for raising this to the net. It's all about collaboration. I had my share of discussions, let's say, with higher than usual tone with the test lead in the projects I worked on. But it's all about getting the same picture about the product. You talked about edge cases. I'll give you an example. Actually, the test lead that was, let's say, my partner, not my adversary in this discussion, later became a developer, and we had a chat, and we remained buddies, let's say, for after we finished working the project that we worked together on, and he was trying to convince me. We were testing an application for a real estate consulting company that was relying solely on the data about the buildings. They were not selling anything, they were not buying anything. They were not selling buildings, they were not buying buildings, they didn't have a building or terrain portfolio. They sold data about some office buildings, about some even individual houses. But the idea was that in a building for a commercial center, like this one, he was testing 9,900,000 square feet per space, a commercial space. And I said, this will never happen. A square feet, 9 square feet are 1 square meter. So we were talking about 1 million square meter per commercial space. Who would rent that? And who would have enough merchandise to expose there, or even accommodate large conferences for this kind of service? And I said, this is not valid. And he said, yes, it's valid because it's a numerical field. It has to support. And I said, okay, let's move to the next level. Which commercial center has a 1 million square meters surface in a single space? And he said, okay. After 3 weeks of argument on this topic, because he was opening bugs, I was closing them. And when he became a UI developer, he came to me and said, okay, I have a similar bug similar with the ones I opened earlier, and I'm fighting with the developer. And I said, don't you have a BA to fight with? So it's all about collaboration. It's all about opening the view to the product, not to the feature or field itself. And you mentioned about sharing responsibilities. That's another story. What do you want to do? Or I create some test data. Does it suit your test cases? Does it suit your test plan? Or even moving even further, the quality gateways. Which test data do you need for that? I can help you with that. That's the approach I'm having. Given when then scenarios. Also, there are a lot of testers that do that. If I do that, I go and validate with them. I'll give you the scenarios written in given when then. You transform it into, you put them into your tool. Add some if you need, but it's a start. It's a thin boundary between what you should do and what I can help you with. That's my approach. It's a good answer, or okay? Any other questions? Please.
In the slides you showed stages of development, and the first step was development, the second step was build.
Yes.
And in the build step you showed that you get the requirements and specifications.
Yes.
Shouldn't you get them, make them prepared before starting the development?
So that's the mapping I did for the phases of continuous delivery. Actually, when do you have the requirements in a project? From your perspective. Usually what I got up until now is right before the sprint. Right? Yeah, so the requirements are listed, first of all spoken, then written, then refined, and then they reach to development. So not necessarily the phase of develop matches the exact phase of development for the team, but the business analyst should come ahead and be able to, at least what I try to do, and I think the guys, the fellow business analysts in the room can agree with that. Business analyst should be able to have stories prepared for some small amount of sprints ahead, depending on the complexity of the project, depending on the let's say changes that the client organization goes through. We can have 2 sprints, 4 sprints, or even more. Is it a good answer for your question? Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I already posted this question in the Slido app, but I'll ask it now.
Okay.
You mentioned some activities you as a business analyst do or support with.
Yeah.
Why not let the team do all these tasks? Why should a business analyst do it? What makes a business analyst better at these tasks than maybe the team?
Thank you. You answered your question with the better part. I'm not saying it's better. I'm saying that the team can focus on more, let's say, specialized things that, and can be the business analyst can support with that. That's my my opinion. So from my perspective, if I have a planning session for 2 hours, usually if it's longer, it's not planning, it's refinement. So, but if I have a planning session of 2 hours and after that the team has a common understanding on those stories, I think it's a better use of their time than staying 3, 4, 5 or even more hours to write down a single user story. So it speeds up the process. That's why business analysts are put in projects. That's my my view on that. It's not about being better. It's about helping others to be better at what they are specialized in. Of course, as I said earlier, a tester for sure writes better test data than a business analyst. But if there's the 60-70% or even more of test data already exists in the project, then the tester will be able to improve his work of getting quality into the product. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, partially.
Oh.
I do have a following question.
Yeah.
Because I think this also is a bit an anti-pattern that you're describing. There's someone else doing certain activities that are that should just be done by the team because they're they should they should do all these things because they're part of their normal work. Now a business analyst does them, but he's not completely involved. You make it sound like it's a lot of work as well. So I'm wondering, I can imagine the role for a business analyst. If you have a really large team, you would have someone maybe doing that.
Yes.
But if you have a small team, 3, 4 people, I won't really see a role for the business analyst. But
You're completely right. If there's a team of 3, 4 people doing creating a product, then those people are really, really involved in have at least one subject matter expert beside them or amongst them, and also the process is already set up. But usually in larger teams and in outsourcing companies, it's hard to get this all together. I'll give you just an example. I worked for about 5 years in Endava, and I worked on insurance, betting, payments, and was there anything else? And some internal projects. And I did some trainings besides all the projects. So if you are in a company that does the same product, that has the same, let's say, market, or even expands a bit the market, but basically they do the same activities, it's easier not to have a business analyst, and the business analyst will do anything else. But in a company, in a services company, it's hard to get the knowledge about the domain. And that's what I think every services company tries to do. Move a bit in using the expertise gained in different domains to put people there. It's a challenge, but I think that answers your question.
Yeah, that answered it a bit more. Okay,
Okay.
cool. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before?
Should a business analyst be an expert in the product?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because you can't be expert when you step out of university. It's physically impossible. You can gain experience in a certain domain, and you can make efforts of self-learning, or go to trainings or whatever. But self-learning is a good component. And as a business analyst, I try to have some, let's say, vaguely defined steps of a process of understanding a product. But some of them are vague, some of them are very concrete. When you say have a product vision, that's very vague, right? But understand where the product stands in the market, that's concrete. That's something that you can feel. And that's what I'm trying to do. So you can't be an expert. You can try to become one in a certain field, but you can't be from the very beginning. And I think that's what defines us as humans, right? We strive for perfection, strive to become experts in something, either boiling an egg or building a software product in a payments industry or whatever. Any other questions before wrapping it up? Okay.